Hey everyone, my name's Luna, and today we will be talking about the psychological effects of HRT, specifically for trans women. So I've been on HRT for almost 6 months, but the psychological changes of it were almost entirely in the first month of transition, and they largely happened all together. So I'm going to talk about these as one big change rather than like a transition timeline. While there were some changes I was told about and others I had learned through other videos and that, I largely was unaware of how significant they would be, and there were many changes that I didn't know would occur at all. I've talked to a few of my friends about them, and a lot of them have shared similar experiences to mine and had similar points that they hadn't been told about before either. But anything with transition is certainly not universal, so your experiences may very well be different. But I'm very interested in hearing from you in the comments below what exactly your experiences were and how they differed, and like what you expected for psychological changes, what you were told, and like how that differed from what you actually experienced. What my doctor had specifically told me about were the potential changes in sex drive or your sexuality that can particularly be distressing if you highly identify with those factors. Of course, from peers and many videos online, it was very demonstrably clear that estrogen would affect your emotions. But even the way I experienced the increased emotions greatly differed from all the accounts I have heard. I also knew from my own medical research on the topic that HRT was very highly effective in treating depression, where it was recommended that physicians wouldn't prescribe antidepressants until patients had been put on HRT, because it is very likely that symptoms of depression will be eliminated simply from HRT, and that antidepressants would be unnecessary or complicate things. It certainly became more emotional, but I wouldn't say it was any way an uncontrolled or like an excess of emotions. And that was how I often heard it described by other trans women and their own experiences. Prior to my own transition, I had a very suppressed emotional range, and I very rarely ever felt any emotions aside from like apathetic depression. I feel that my emotional range now is closer to the normal range of a human being, and I'm more able to adequately emotionally process things, and I have adequate emotions for situations that I go through. I'm also certainly more aware of my emotions. Before I had been on HRT, I was generally aware of what I had felt, but I very much was not aware of the motivations for that feeling, and I wasn't very articulate of what I was feeling and what I needed to do in response to that feeling. My emotional processing is also certainly a lot more quick. I think a lot of it has to do because I am aware of my emotions and I know what I need to do to resolve a negative emotion, but I'm also more cognitively able to process emotions when I am feeling strong emotions. When there is a strong negative event in my life, I'm able to cry through it for an hour or so, and I'm able to process it, and I'm able to feel good after. Whereas before HRT, I had largely not been able to process emotions, and I had largely bottled them up. And I had a lot of unresolved emotions that I hadn't been able to process. I also have a lot more positive of a mood after HRT, regardless of the actual positive effects of having my physical transition and the social effects of it. Just my day-to-day mood, even before I had experienced physical effects of my transition, was greatly increased. Before hormones, I don't think I ever had a baseline emotion of happy. My baseline emotion usually ranked somewhere on the negative side of the scale, and I would only feel positive if I had a strong reason to. But that drastically changed with hormones. There's days where I wake up and I can be happy, which is certainly an insane thought once you've lived 20 years otherwise. The change was so significant that for a while I no longer thought or identified with like a diagnosis of depression, or specifically chronic depression, because my experience with depression was no longer day to day. Though I still certainly do have depression, it stems almost purely from more conditional factors such as my PTSD or other situational extents. The depression I experience largely doesn't have any more systematic motivations with it, or I've got chemical imbalances or anything like that. So I'm a lot more focused on treating the conditional elements of my depression and the things that motivate my depression, though that's certainly a lot harder. With my increased mood, I also most certainly experienced a boost in my own self-image, and that happened regardless of my own body changes that happened in transition. Even in points where I hadn't yet experienced physical changes or anything significant, I felt a lot better about myself, and I had a lot less of a distorted view of my own image, and I was much more comfortable seeing myself in the mirror or in pictures. Prior to hormones, I also felt very strongly alienated, not just socially, but I felt entirely disconnected from my own body. I largely didn't feel human, and I didn't feel connected to it in any way. I was very dissociated from it. I no longer feel that now that I've been on hormones. I'm a lot more present and aware in my own body. I'm a lot more connected, and I feel that my own body is mine. I don't feel a cognitive disconnect in any way. And most importantly, I feel human. I feel very comfortable existing and perceiving my own self, and I'm able to identify with my own self. Another drastic change you can notice is like different feelings, especially with like romantic or sexual feelings. You can feel them entirely differently. Feelings that you physically feel in a certain place can be different in your body. The feelings can act differently, and they can make you feel different than they did before. There were also a lot of social changes that happened, but they're a lot harder to pinpoint as specifically psychological changes, because when your transition does change you, there's a lot of differences in how people also react to you. I feel a lot more connected to the people that I do talk to, and I'm a lot more involved in conversation, and I'm also more acutely aware of the emotions of others. While starting social transition, you certainly become more acutely aware to the emotions of how people perceive you and how they gender you and how they behave regarding those factors. But the emotional awareness that I've gained from hormones has been quite different than that. The prior has certainly been more of a survival tactic where you're looking for it and you're forced to be aware of those factors. I believe the hormonal changes are largely due to me gaining my own emotional awareness and being able to use that emotional awareness on others as well. The emotional awareness is certainly more subtle than the rest of the changes, but I'm more able to understand other people's intentions. I usually struggle greatly with understanding people's intentions and their motivations and how they intend to frame a specific statement. But I feel like I'm attuned to understanding it a lot better after my hormones. With emotional awareness, I've also stopped reading so much into single cues, which I think is a very masculine way of interpreting conversation. And because of it, you can distort the view of the rest of the conversation instead of continuing to look for continued cues in how someone continues to talk to you. The emotions of conversation have definitely changed a lot too. I'm definitely a lot more comfortable in conversation, and I definitely fit in a lot more, which certainly has to do with a mixture of elements. But I believe that my own emotional awareness that I found through hormones also contributes to it. I'm a lot more comfortable and I'm a lot more confident within conversations and within many different varieties of social situations. Flirting is definitely one of them. Flirtiness is something I've heard multiple women comment on, and I think it has a strong correlation to being able to be comfortable in your body, being able to be comfortable in a social role, being able to be comfortable in your sexuality, and know that someone reads you how you are. But I also think it comes with emotional awareness. I'm also certainly able to express my emotions a lot better, which has a lot to do with the fact that I'm actually attuned and understand my own emotions a lot better. And I no longer use irony as a level of disguise for my own personality, which largely came from the alienation I did feel, especially before my own social transition. I had a very difficult time expressing any authentic emotions or personalities of my own self. These changes have all been very wonderful and fulfilling, but this is not to say that I don't have other psychological things I continue to need to work through. Having the right hormones for my neurology is huge, but I'm still neurodiverse, and I've still got trauma, and I've got a lot of things that I need to work through. And I think it's very important to note that you shouldn't entirely focus on your transition at the odds of all other things. It's very important to focus on your own mental health and your own physical health, making sure that you can remove yourself from psychologically abusive situations, making sure you can have a house, making sure you have food, making sure you're able to emotionally process the things around you and the things that happen. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope it was interesting. I'm most certainly interested in hearing about your experiences, what you particularly were told about psychological changes of transition, what you experienced, how the particular changes you experienced differed from what you were told. And of course, it'd be wonderful if you want to follow along and continue to hear about my transition and continue to hear about trans topics and trans discourse. Have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you later.